1. Iowa public media faces historic funding cuts. Impact on PBS, NPR, and Iowans. 2. Trump's victory over PBS and NPR funding. What it means for rural areas. 1. Iowa public media faces historic funding cuts. Impact on PBS, NPR, and Iowans. Imagine a world where the voices that keep you informed and entertained might suddenly be silenced. That's the stark reality facing Iowa's public media as Congress considers a bill that could slash $9 billion from taxpayer dollars, affecting both foreign aid and public broadcasting. But here's where it gets controversial. 2 Republicans voted against this measure, suggesting there might be some resistance within their party. The Senate's version alone proposed cutting around $8 billion from foreign assistance programs, including USAID, and another $1 billion from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which supports beloved institutions like NPR and PBS. This isn't just a theoretical threat. It's a tangible risk that could impact over 1,500 television and radio stations across the nation. In Johnston, Todd Magel, a senior reporter from KCCI, is providing a detailed look at how Iowa Public Television is preparing for these unprecedented funding cuts. He visited Iowa Public Television, where officials are grappling with millions of dollars in budget reductions. But Iowa Public Television isn't alone in its concerns. The Iowa Radio Reading Information Service, IRIS, based in Des Moines, is particularly worried. IRIS is a vital service that relies on volunteers to read news to visually impaired Iowans via a statewide radio network. Rachel Mithelman, one of IRIS's readers, expressed her profound disappointment, stating, "Public broadcasting and NPR are crucial services that we can't afford to lose." Mary Frances Evans, the director of IRIS, highlighted how their service depends on the broadcast systems provided by Iowa Public Radio and Television. Currently, this arrangement is free, but if IPTV faces funding cuts, Evans fears increased costs. "If IPTV has to charge us more, we'll have to pay up because we need them," she said. Without public media, there's no IRIS. The situation at Iowa Public Television is even more pressing. General Manager Andrew Batt revealed that Congress is considering a $3.5 million annual reduction in IPTV's budget, representing nearly 20% of its total funding and impacting 25 staff members. Batt anticipates significant changes in the public broadcasting landscape beginning this fall. Despite the challenges, he remains committed to IPTV's mission, serving the people of Iowa. "It's a chaotic time, but we have to adapt and stay true to our mission," he said. IPTV leaders have been lobbying Iowa's congressional delegation to oppose these harmful budget cuts. As the bill now moves back to the House for a final vote before reaching the president's desk, the future of public media in Iowa hangs in the balance. The implications extend far beyond just entertainment. These stations play a critical role in education and community engagement. And this is the part most people miss. While some argue that these cuts represent fiscal responsibility, others believe they undermine essential public services. As the debate rages on, it's clear that the fate of Iowa's public media rests in the hands of policymakers and, ultimately, the taxpayers who fund them. What do you think? Should Congress proceed with these cuts, or is it time to invest more in public broadcasting? 2. Trump's victory over PBS and NPR funding, what it means for rural areas. Trump's triumph over biased public broadcasting will devastate rural communities, station officials warn. The future of America's public broadcasting hangs in the balance after a midnight Senate vote that has completely eliminated federal funding for PBS and NPR, a decision that will force dramatic changes across the nation's public media landscape. Public television stations will be forced to make hard decisions in the weeks and months ahead, PBS CEO Paula Kerger announced Thursday, following the Senate's approval of legislation that completely strips federal funding from both networks for the first time since their inception. The consequences will be far-reaching and painful. Staff layoffs and program reductions appear inevitable. Beloved children's shows like Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood may reach significantly fewer children nationwide. While iconic characters like Big Bird won't disappear entirely, the financial foundation that has supported such educational programming for generations is being dismantled before our eyes. Once the House passes this bill, which observers consider virtually certain. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting will see its budget completely zeroed out for the first time since 1967, an era when television was still broadcast in black and white. But here's where it gets controversial. This represents a long-sought victory for President Trump, who has repeatedly condemned PBS and NPR news coverage as biased, while simultaneously delivering a devastating blow to local stations that have relied on taxpayer support for decades. The exact impact remains difficult to predict with precision, as other funding sources may partially fill the void. However, public media executives warn that numerous smaller broadcasters will likely be forced to cease operations entirely in the coming months and years. This is particularly troubling because stations serving rural areas and smaller communities typically depend more heavily on federal subsidies. While stations in major metropolitan areas generally access diverse funding streams, including viewer donations and foundation grants, their rural counterparts often lack these alternatives. Advocates for public broadcasting argue that the entire ecosystem of non-commercial media will be fundamentally weakened without this foundational taxpayer support, resulting in fewer original productions and diminished local news coverage across America. Kerger emphasized that these cuts will significantly impact all of our stations, but will be especially devastating to smaller stations and those serving large rural areas. She specifically highlighted how these stations provide access to free, unique local programming and emergency alerts, services that may now be at risk. Interestingly, the two Republican senators who voted against the funding elimination, Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins, both expressed appreciation for these vital aspects of public media, even while criticizing what they perceived as bias in certain NPR programming. Most of their Republican colleagues, however, focused almost exclusively on allegations of political bias, arguing that the entire public broadcasting system has become obsolete in today's streaming-dominated media landscape. David Bozell, president of the Media Research Center, an organization that has campaigned against federal support for public broadcasting for decades, celebrated what he called a historic rollback in an overnight post on X. PBS and NPR were chartered to provide objective journalism, Bozell wrote. Instead, we got drag shows for kids, gushing coverage of Democrats, and silence or smears for conservatives. Public media officials vehemently dispute these characterizations, arguing that critics fundamentally misrepresent their actual programming content. As evidence, Thursday morning's report about the funding elimination on NPR's Morning Edition maintained studious neutrality, with hosts explicitly noting that NPR management had no involvement in news coverage of its own funding crisis. Nearly 3 in 4 Americans say they rely on their public radio stations for alerts and news for their public safety, NPR CEO Catherine Marr stated, describing NPR as a lifeline for many communities across the country. Early Thursday, America's Public Television Stations, an advocacy group representing local stations, argued that the funding elimination defies the will of the American people, citing both polling data and the fact that Congress had actually allocated the next round of funding earlier this year, funding that will now be rescinded. When Congress established the Corporation for Public Broadcasting in 1967, it explicitly declared that non-commercial television and radio for instructional, educational, and cultural purposes serve the public interest. This vision gave birth to iconic programs like Sesame Street and Antiques Roadshow that have educated and entertained generations of Americans. For many years, the public media system continued to enjoy bipartisan support from lawmakers, even as conservative activists periodically attempted to eliminate taxpayer funding. Congress routinely rejected proposals from previous Republican presidents to cut PBS and NPR budgets. But Trump has proven far more determined and effective in this pursuit. Earlier this year, he made it a personal priority to reclaim the funding before the Corporation for Public Broadcasting was scheduled to receive it in October. For decades, Republicans have promised to cut NPR but have never done it until now, Trump boasted in a Truth Social post last month. And this is the part most people miss. The nearly $1.1 billion that had been allocated for the next 2 years will begin to disappear this fall. Some local stations are already implementing changes in anticipation of the funding loss. In New York, the operator of powerhouse NPR station WNYC announced Wednesday that its CEO LaFontaine Oliver is transitioning to a newly created position of executive chair specifically designed to address funding threats. Oliver will concentrate on developing new funding models and securing financial support from non-federal sources. In San Francisco, the KQED radio and television network has already announced layoffs affecting approximately 15% of its staff, citing financial uncertainties created by the funding elimination. Despite today's setback, we are determined to keep fighting to preserve the essential services we provide to the American public, Kerger affirmed. What do you think? Is this a necessary correction of politically biased institutions, or a devastating blow to educational and community-focused media? Has your local PBS or NPR station made a difference in your community? Share your thoughts in the comments below.